Okay, the committee will now move to our next witness, Commissioner Carr, who appears to be online. I'll just check that you can hear us and see us, Commissioner.
I got you, yes.
Thank you. I now welcome Commissioner Brendan Carr of the United States Federal Communications Commission joining us via video conference. As noted in your invitation, people giving evidence outside Australia are not protected by parliamentary privilege. For the Hansard record, could you please give your name and the capacity in which you appear today?
My name is Brendan Carr, and I'm one of the commissioners here at the Federal Communications Commission in Washington, D.C.
Thank you, and we're grateful for you joining us in the evening, your time, morning, our time. I now invite you to make a short opening statement, and then members of the committee will ask questions.
Well, thank you so much, Senator and Chair, for the invitation to testify. Thank you as well to the distinguished members of the committee for your interest in this exceptionally important topic. The issue of social media and the potential for malign conduct through those platforms is something that officials and regulators across the globe are very focused on right now. I want to focus my remarks on one application in particular, TikTok, that I think presents an exceedingly unique threat to national security. And as I do so, I'm going to focus on 2 points in particular. One is surveillance, and the second piece of it is foreign influence. There's other issues as well, but I think those are two predominant issues that are relevant to this committee's inquiry. On the surveillance side, for years, Americans and consumers across the globe looked at TikTok as simply another video platform for sharing funny memes or dance videos. The reality is that TikTok operates as a very sophisticated surveillance technology. While they've represented that they collect very little information, they've made claims, TikTok, that they are entirely in line with other social media sites. That's not what the evidence indicates. TikTok collects everything from search and browsing history, keystroke patterns. Its terms of service reserves the right to get biometrics, including face prints and voice prints. And for years, TikTok told regulators not to worry. The data was not stored inside China. In some cases, they said that the data didn't even exist inside China. Well, flash forward to this past summer, and a BuzzFeed News report got internal TikTok communications that showed, in fact, everything, quote, is seen inside China. We've seen additional evidence pile on for there. For instance, TikTok represented that it, in fact, denied a report that it was using the app, a China-based team, to surveil the location of specific Americans. They said that that report lacked journalistic integrity. It turns out that that report was entirely accurate, and TikTok later has now admitted that they used the app to surveil the locations of specific Americans, in fact, reporters that have been writing negative stories about TikTok and other reporters located outside of the United States as well. Now the U.S. Department of Justice and FBI is looking into that exact type of conduct. Switching gears to the foreign influence side, the CCP's propaganda arm set up TikTok accounts and, unlike other social media, did not disclose the state media affiliation of those accounts. And those accounts targeted U.S. politicians for criticism ahead of our most recent midterm elections, accounts that saw millions and millions of views on those videos. New analysis submitted right here in this very proceeding. The Australian Senate found that the average TikTok user is more likely to be exposed to content favorable to the CCP when entering search terms in TikTok than entering those same search terms on other major social media platforms. So, for instance, that research found that search results for the PLA were overwhelmingly pro-CCP. In addition, we have leaked documents obtained by a reporter back in 2019 showing that TikTok instructed its moderators to censor videos that mention Tiananmen Square, Tibetan independence, and other sort of political hot topics. That same year, 2019, searches for Hong Kong on Twitter returned images of pro-democracy marchers and other scenes of protests. In contrast, searches for that same hashtag on TikTok showed a very different picture of Hong Kong. It showed people in playful selfies, food photos, barely any hint of unrest. And similarly, a 2020 study by the Australian Strategic Policy Institute found that the top videos for Xinjiang on TikTok were exceedingly bent towards a sort of a pro-CCP propaganda view. So again, when you sort of step back and you look at this issue, whether it's from the surveillance perspective or from the foreign influence perspective, we have a tremendous amount of data that gives rise to a unique concern. Here in the U.S., the concern is bipartisan. Democrat Senator Mark Warner, he's the chair of our Senate Intelligence Committee, has said that TikTok is an enormous threat. He's been a very strong leader on that. FBI Director Chris Wray has raised the alarms. Our Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, has expressed concerns. CIA Director, as well as DOJ's number 2, Lisa Monaco, has said she's not on TikTok and doesn't recommend that anybody use it. So the concern is broad and deep here in the U.S. and across the globe. With that, I'm happy to end my sort of brief opening remarks and would welcome the chance to have a conversation and answer any questions that you or the committee may have.
Thank you, Commissioner. We're very grateful for your time and your insights. You have been one of the earliest and leading voices in calling out the risks posed by this application in particular. You've set out very well there the range of issues with the application, including the foreign interference risk and also the data security and privacy risk that it represents, and in fact the company's misleading defences of itself in the past. Just one of those ones that you didn't cover though, is there any doubt in your mind that TikTok, through its parent company ByteDance, is ultimately controlled by and beholden to the Chinese Communist Party?
No, I don't have a doubt. And I think if you look again at the evidence that's been put in the record in this proceeding, including this 113-page report that I believe people will be testifying to later today, that's a really comprehensive look behind the curtain at the deep entanglement between TikTok employees, ByteDance employees, and CCP membership itself. There's evidence that almost all these employees, or a significant number, are dual-hatted, meaning they work for TikTok and ByteDance. There's employees in the U.S., for instance, that say they work one shift here and then have to essentially work another shift that aligns with the timelines that officials working in China. And one additional quick point there that's very concerning. When a senior TikTok official, I believe their COO, was testifying here in our Senate a few months ago, they were asked point blank, do you share sensitive U.S. user data with personnel, TikTok or ByteDance, in Beijing that are themselves members of the CCP? And that official declined to answer that question. I think a lot of these concerns could have been put to rest if they'd answered pointedly and either said no or frankly perhaps said yes, and here's the protections put in place. But the evasive nature of these answers over years is deeply concerning. Because
of you and others appearing before this committee have pointed out, there's multiple lines of control here. They're subject to the national intelligence laws of China. There are CCP members on the board. The company has a strategic stake the government has a strategic stake in the company. There are Communist Party cells in the organisation. There are dual-hatted employees. I mean, the company itself says we would refuse a request by law enforcement or intelligence agencies to do so. On what basis could they, in China, refuse a request like that?
I'm aware of no basis. Once you have personnel, people inside China, whether they are formerly ByteDance or even formerly TikTok, those people are subject to China's 2017 national security law, which compels them to aid in the CCP's surveillance and propaganda efforts. Similarly, I'll give you this point of evidence. The argument that somehow TikTok is going to stand up to the CCP is belied by their inability to do it at any point in time publicly. For instance, they've been asked in U.S. media and interviews whether they acknowledge the existence of the Uyghur genocide that's taking place in Xinjiang, and their official on TV refused to address it. That same question was posed to their CEO when he testified here recently and once again declined to address it. If a TikTok official is not willing to say that the CCP is committing genocide with respect to Uyghurs, then that gives very little comfort that they would turn them down and say no to them when they do come to them for access. And again, it's almost separate than access. They're so intermingled here right now in terms of the data that is accessible from inside China. It's not clear that a formal ask would even be necessary in these circumstances.
There are a number of proposed solutions to deal with this problem in the United States, and I'm interested in your perspective on which of those is most likely to be successful and therefore which Australia should contemplate. TikTok itself has advanced this notion of Project Texas of working with Oracle to store US user data in the United States. They've got an equivalent program in Europe called Project Clover. It might be of interest to you to know they haven't even proposed a similar program in Australia. There's no equivalent to Project Texas or Project Clover, which I think shows how dismissive they are of our concerns. There's that potential solution. There are a couple of bills before Congress to ban the app outright, a couple of different ways of doing that. And there are reports in the media that the administration is considering a mechanism to force ByteDance to divest TikTok to a non-Chinese owner. Of those three options, do you have a view which is the most likely to be successful, or is there another option that we should be considering?
There's a number of options on the table. Your point about Project Texas is interesting. This is the initiative that TikTok has been attempting to sell to our government for the last 2 years. So to step back and tell you where sort of things are in the U.S., I'm at the FCC. We have a lot of experience dealing with entities with corporate ties back to China and malign data flows. We've taken action, for instance, on Huawei, ZTE, China Mobile, China Telecom. With TikTok right now, it's principally within the jurisdiction of CFIUS, which is a Committee on Foreign Investment that's run out of Treasury Department. That's where these negotiations have been with TikTok. That's where Project Texas has been floated. One of the most significant things from this recent congressional hearing is you had the Democrat ranking member of the House committee say that he did not believe that even if we put Project Texas in place, it would have sufficient protections against the CCP having control over TikTok. And he's right. In fact, you don't take his word or even my word for it. The BuzzFeed News article that got leaked internal audio from TikTok officials had DC officials for TikTok saying that even after Project Texas was put in place, it, quote, remains to be seen if product and engineering, meaning Beijing, would continue to have access to the data. So if TikTok officials themselves don't believe that Project Texas is actually going to safeguard data in terms of access from inside China, then I think we should take their word for it. So that particular effort is no comfort at all. The other options you talked about, one would be a complete ban of TikTok in the US, which I support. The other would be a genuine divestiture and elimination of all corporate ties back to China. A genuine effort like that is one that I'm open to as well. In fact, as you indicated, the Biden administration, according to reports, has told TikTok through that CFIUS process that they should either divest those Chinese corporate interests or face a possible ban. Right now in the U.S., we have legislation in the House and the Senate taking a variety of different approaches, but ultimately I think some sort of rifle shot legislation that imposes a ban or a genuine divestiture is the way forward. Right now we have a ban on TikTok for federal devices, nationwide government devices, and about 30 states have imposed bans on state devices, and at least one has imposed a total ban on TikTok as well. But I think of all the options that are out there, a ban or genuine divestiture is the only path forward. Project Texas is not enough to allay concerns.
Some people, not just the company itself, but some experts independently of the company say the problem here isn't any one platform or any one company. It's generally how privacy is dealt with. And what we need is more comprehensive laws to protect our privacy. For example, we should follow the European Union and have a general data protection right, and that would solve these problems. What's your view of those arguments? Do you think a solution like that would be sufficient?
It wouldn't be sufficient. Look, I think we do need better baseline privacy protections that apply to all social media, whether they're based in Silicon Valley or Brussels or Beijing. But that is not a substitute for the unique type of threats that we're seeing with respect to TikTok. What's one piece of evidence to show that? The privacy protections that are in place right now in Europe are held up by a lot of advocates as a gold standard, GDPR, other protections, and yet we're seeing right now Europe engage in concerted action to address TikTok. Netherlands, for instance, banning it, I believe, from federal devices, European Parliament, European Commission taking action as well. If privacy protections were enough to address TikTok, then we wouldn't see these concerns existing today in Europe. So privacy is important, but when you're dealing with a company, an operation with a history of misrepresentations, where you do not have a baseline level of trust because of their conduct, privacy protection isn't tailored to address those national security threats.
And of course, no matter how robust your privacy protection legislation is, that does nothing at all about the foreign interference risk posed by platforms like this. Just finally, before I off the call to the Deputy Chair, Senator Walsh, do you have concerns about other apps? You've had a particular focus on TikTok. Are there other apps that we should be concerned about as well?
I think there's others that are out there. I think TikTok is, frankly, from my perspective, the lowest of the low-hanging fruit because we have such a clear public case at this point, which I think is part of it as government officials. We need to make the case to people of the very real threat. But once we take action on TikTok, I think it then makes it easier for us to look at what are other apps out there that pose similar threats. But I don't think we can sit back and get a list of 10, 15, 20 applications and wait until we have that whole basket of ones identified before action. We can take action on TikTok now and then take a hard look at others, whether it's WeChat or other applications.
Thank you. Senator Walsh. Thank you, Deputy Chair. I just have a couple more follow-up questions, Commissioner Carr, and then we will let you go and get along with your evening. I want to delve a little bit more deeply on the dueling legislative solutions in the US system and the merits or otherwise of each, to the extent you're comfortable commenting on them. You mentioned Senator Warner as the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee. As a Democrat, he's got one of those bills, the Restrict Act, which would encompass TikTok, but also is more broad, and as I understand it, requires the Commerce Department to conduct a review of applications from a set number of countries. What's your view of that approach, in contrast to what I understand is a more narrow bill coming out of the House Republicans to just deal with TikTok and ban it for now before contemplating other issues?
Yeah, I think the Senator Warner bill, to your point, tries to codify a broader process that would run through all sorts of apps and attempts to avoid what it would see as sort of a whack-a-mole approach, different bills. For my part, I've put out a statement endorsing what we call sort of the Congressman Gallagher, Republican, and Congressman Krishnamurthy, Democrat, bill that's in the House that is sort of a more targeted approach at TikTok. And part of that, from my perspective, is speed, which is when you have TikTok, it's gone through a 2-year process at this point in Treasury. It's been unable to convince Treasury that it can sign off on it without national security threats. So I think moving now, based on the record with TikTok, in my perspective, is probably the best near-term effort that we can do.
And just on that, the other potential solution, the divestment solution, just explain to us the mechanism by which the US government would require that. It's a CFIUS, Committee on Foreign Investment process, isn't it?
Yeah, that's one way you could do it. So CFIUS has done this before. For instance, an app Grindr had some Beijing-based ownership, and CFIUS required the divestment of that ownership, and it, in fact, did do that divestment. CFIUS could do it, but you could also pass legislation. You could have legislation in Congress that could require the divestiture, a genuine divestiture. And of course, there's a fundamental question: would the CCP sign off on a genuine divestment? And I'm not sure that the answer to that would be yes. But again, that sort of undermines the argument that TikTok is, not beholden to the CCP if they could block a business decision that the company would otherwise make to agree or to comply with a divestiture order. So I think it's unlikely, if you order a divestiture, that TikTok would do that. In other words, that the CCP would allow it. But I still think a genuine divestiture is a viable path forward from my perspective for national security.
Yeah, TikTok certainly asserts in many ways that it does operate independently of ByteDance and that its objective is to provide a platform outside of China to people to communicate on. It would be hard to understand why TikTok as a company, as an entity, would have any objection to a different ownership structure if that is their sincere and objective. It shouldn't make any difference to them who ultimately owns them, should it?
Well, that's right. And I think, one of the arguments we're seeing increasingly here in the U.S. is this argument around our First Amendment or free speech in general, that we can't ban TikTok consistent with the First Amendment in the U.S., but that's not correct. The U.S. Supreme Court First Amendment law is pretty clear on this. It draws a distinction between government action based on an entity's content versus its conduct. In other words, if we were to seek to prohibit TikTok because of the speech that's on the platform, that we disagree with it as a government, that would raise very serious First Amendment issues. But that's not this circumstance. This is based on TikTok's conduct, meaning the data flows back to China that represent an unacceptable national security threat. In fact, we have a Supreme Court case that looked at a situation I think is very analogous, a bookstore. The bookstore owner was running a criminal enterprise out of the bookstore, And so the government shut down the bookstore for it. And the bookstore owner said, you can't do that. That violates the First Amendment because it stops people from coming here to buy books. And the Supreme Court swiped that argument aside and didn't even run a First Amendment analysis in that case. And that makes eminent sense. Obviously, you cannot engage in illegal conduct and then immunize yourself from accountability by saying that your enterprise also involves or touches on speech. Now, that said, as a government official, again, we have millions and millions of users of TikTok in the U.S., and so we need to make this case plainly to them. And that's also why I think a divestiture could be an appealable solution, because it would allow the application to continue to exist. I don't have a problem with the existence of short-form video applications, just the one that presents an unacceptable threat.
And if it is the case that the Chinese government would object to that or prevent that from occurring, ultimately we're going to be back down to those two remaining potential solutions of banning it outright or Project Texas. So I imagine, in your view, if divestment is not successful, if that can't happen for any reason, that really the only viable option left then would be to ban the app.
That's right. Project Texas is a non-starter. Now, if you do go genuine divestment and TikTok or the CCP on their behalf refuses, in some ways that strengthens your legal hand in defense of a ban because you provided an alternative path forward that the company rejected. So that's one additional wrinkle when thinking about it from a legislative perspective about how do you do this in a way that will be legally sustainable.
Commissioner, thank you very much. Your evidence has been extremely helpful to the committee today. If there are no further questions, I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.